Report 1. I rent the top floor of a converted house on a street that doesn't really have foot traffic. 2 bedrooms, 1 I use, 1 full of things I keep meaning to sort. The landlord lives in Spain. I've been there 4 years. I mention all of that because I want to be clear that I knew the place. I knew the way the radiator clicked in the mornings, I knew which step on the inside staircase had the loose nail, I knew the specific angle the bathroom door rested at when no one had touched it in a while. You learn those things without trying. The first thing was the bath mat. I came home from work on a Tuesday. I think it was a Tuesday because I'd stopped at the shop for the bin bags I keep forgetting, and the bath mat in the bathroom was folded in half. Not crumpled, not kicked aside. Folded. Lengthwise. I stood in the doorway with the bag still in my hand and tried to remember if I'd done it. I sometimes fold it back when I mop, but I hadn't mopped. I unfolded it and put it flat and didn't think about it again until 2 days later, when the cabinet under the kitchen sink was open about an inch. That one I actually laughed at, because the cat next door gets in sometimes through the back, and I assumed she'd nosed at it. Except I hadn't seen the cat that week. And the cabinet has one of those magnetic catches that you have to pull, not push. I started paying more attention after that, but the way you pay attention when you're being slightly silly about it. I'd come in and glance around and tell myself I was being neurotic. For about 2 weeks nothing happened, and I genuinely forgot. Then one evening I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone, lights off, and I heard the floor in the second bedroom make the soft groan it makes when weight shifts on it. Once. Just once. I lay there with the phone on my chest and waited for it to happen again, and it didn't, and after about 10 minutes I told myself the heating was on and would expand. I did not get up to check. I want to be honest about that. I did not get up to check because if I got up to check, I would have to decide what to do if there was something to find, and I was tired, and I had work in the morning. The next morning the door to that second bedroom was open about a hand's width. I always keep it closed because of the dust. I closed it. I went to work. I told a coworker about it in the way you do when you want someone to call you stupid so you can stop worrying, and she said her boyfriend leaves doors open all the time and never remembers. I don't have a boyfriend. I laughed anyway. What changed it for me was the charger. I have a specific charging cable on my nightstand, a braided one, white, because the standard one's fray. One night it was on the floor next to the bed, plugged in but lying on the carpet. I picked it up and the end of it was warm. Not hot. Warm, like something had been drawing through it recently. My phone had been in my bag all evening. I sat on the edge of the bed holding this warm cable and I felt the first real drop of something in my stomach, the kind that doesn't go away when you breathe out. I checked the flat properly that night. Every cupboard, behind the sofa, the airing cupboard, the storage room. Nothing. Windows locked, front door deadbolt. I slept with the bedroom door closed and a chair pushed up under the handle, which I'd seen in a film once and which I now realized does almost nothing on a door that opens inward. In the morning the chair was where I'd left it. I felt foolish all day. I found out about 3 weeks later, when I was looking for the spare key to give to a friend who was watering the plants while I went to my sister's. The spare key lives in a small ceramic dish on the bookshelf by the door. The dish was there. The key was not. I tipped the dish out, I looked behind the books, I went through every coat pocket. It was not in the flat. I sat on the floor of the hallway for a while and thought about every time I'd had the door open for a delivery, every time I'd left a window cracked, every person who had ever set foot in there. I changed the locks the next day. The locksmith said the old cylinder had marks consistent with being picked, but he also said that was hard to tell for certain and that lots of cylinders look like that after years of normal use. He wasn't trying to scare me. I think he was trying to be fair. I still live there. I don't really know what else to say about that. Sometimes when I come home and everything is exactly where I left it, exactly, the bath mat flat, the cupboards closed, the doors at their right angles, I feel a relief that is too big for the situation, and that relief itself tells me something I don't like. Report 2. We moved into the house in late autumn. My wife was pregnant with our second, and we wanted the extra bedroom and the garden, and the price was reasonable in a way that, in hindsight, we should have asked more questions about. The previous owner was an older man who'd lived there for 31 years. His daughter handled the sale. She was pleasant. She left us a folder with the boiler manual and the bin collection days and a note that said welcome. For the first month everything was the kind of normal that comes with unpacking. Boxes everywhere, takeaway containers, our older boy treating the empty rooms like a racetrack. I want to say it was 4 or 5 weeks in that I noticed the back gate. We have a side return that leads to a small garden, and the gate at the end of it opens onto a service alley. The bolt on the inside of that gate was undone. I'd checked it the night we moved in, because my wife asked me to, and I'd slid it across and tested it. Now it was open. I closed it again and didn't mention it. A week after that it was open again. This time I stood in the garden in my socks looking at it and I thought, all right, maybe the wind, maybe the bolt is loose, maybe one of the kids. Our older one is 3. He can't reach it. I bought a small padlock from the hardware shop on the high street and I put it on the inside of the gate. I felt slightly ridiculous doing it. The padlock stayed locked. The thing that started to bother me was the smell in the utility room. It's a small room off the kitchen, washing machine, boiler, a door to the garden. Every few days there would be a smell in there that wasn't quite right. Not bad. Just present. Like someone had been in a coat that had been somewhere else. Damp wool, cold air, the kind of smell a person brings in from outside in winter. My wife noticed it too. She blamed the drains. I called a plumber. He came out, looked at everything, said the drains were fine, charged us £70, and left. I started locking the utility room door from the kitchen side at night. I told my wife it was because the boiler made noise and I didn't want it waking the baby. That was partly true. One morning I came downstairs at about 5:30 because the baby had been up, and the utility room door was open. The one I'd locked. The key was still in the lock on the kitchen side. I stood there in the dark holding a half-made bottle and I looked at that door and I thought, I'm tired, I'm wrong, I didn't lock it, I only thought I did. I closed it. I made the bottle. I went back upstairs. That afternoon I went into the garden to put something in the bin and I noticed, on the paving by the back door, a small dark mark. Mud, or something like it. Just one. The shape of part of a shoe. Not mine. Not my wife's. Too big for our boy. I crouched down and looked at it and the rational part of my brain produced about 6 explanations in a row. The delivery man, the meter reader, a neighbor cutting through, and the other part of my brain went quiet in the way it does when it already knows. I went to the neighbor on the right, an older woman who has lived on the street since before the previous owner. I asked her, as casually as I could, whether the old man had ever had any trouble. Any break-ins, anyone hanging around. She looked at me for a moment and she said, no trouble, but he did have a lodger for a long time, didn't he? A nephew or a cousin or something. Lived in the loft room. She hadn't seen him in years, she said. She thought he'd moved out before the old man died, but she wasn't sure. She wasn't sure where he'd gone. We don't have a loft room. We have a loft hatch in the upstairs hallway, with a pull-down ladder. I had been up there once, the day we viewed the house, and it was empty and dusty and that was the end of it. That evening, after my wife and the kids were asleep, I pulled the ladder down and I went up with a torch. The loft is boarded over most of its floor. At the far end, behind the water tank, there is a section that is partitioned off with hardboard. A small door in it, the kind of door a person can fit through if they crouch. Inside, behind that door, there is a mattress on the floor. A folded blanket. An empty water bottle. A phone charger plugged into a socket I didn't know existed up there. The mattress was not dusty. The blanket was not dusty. I came down the ladder very quietly and I sat on the landing for a long time. I did not wake my wife. I did not call anyone. I'm not proud of that. I think I was trying to decide whether what I'd seen was as bad as it was, and I needed to sit with it before I made it real by telling someone. In the morning I called the police, and they came, and they were kind, and they took photographs, and they said it looked like someone had been using the space, possibly intermittently, possibly for some time, but they couldn't say when. They put a notice out. Nothing came of it. We had a builder seal the partition off properly and put a proper hatch with a lock on the main loft entrance. We've been there nearly 2 years now. My wife sleeps fine. I sleep mostly fine. The thing I can't get past is not the mattress. It's the smell in the utility room those first few weeks, and the way I'd stood in the kitchen and told myself it was the drains. He must have come down. He must have come down past the boiler and into the kitchen and looked at our things while we slept upstairs. I don't know how many times. The padlock on the gate was probably the day he stopped using the gate. Report 3. I want to say first that I work shifts. 12 hours, 4 on 4 off, sometimes nights, sometimes days. My sleep is bad and my memory for the small parts of the day is worse, and when I tell this I am aware that some of it could be me misremembering. I have thought about that a lot. I live alone in a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a block of about 40 flats. The kind of building where you don't really know your neighbors but you nod at the ones on your landing. The corridors have those motion sensor lights that click on when you walk past them. I have lived there 6 years. The first thing was that the light outside my door was on when I came home one night from a late shift. It was about 2:15 in the morning. I stepped out of the lift and the corridor light was already on. Which is normal, except the way those sensors work, they go off after about 90 seconds, and the lift had taken a while because someone on the second floor was holding it. So either the light had just turned off and on for me, which the timing didn't quite fit, or someone had been in the corridor not long before me. I noticed it and I didn't think about it. People go to the bins at strange times. People come home from work at strange times. I came home from work at a strange time. It happened again maybe a week later. And then more often than that. I started noticing it. I would step out of the lift and the corridor light would already be on, and there would be no one there. My flat is the second from the end. Past me is one more flat and then the fire door to the stairwell. I asked the man in the flat next to mine, casually, in the lift one morning, whether he kept odd hours. He said no, he worked 9 to 5, he was always asleep by 11. I asked if he'd had visitors lately and he looked at me like that was a strange question, which it was, and he said no. Around that time I started to feel like my flat smelled faintly of someone else's deodorant when I came home. Not strongly. Just a trace, the way a room smells after a person has left it. I told myself it was the hallway carpet, or the vents, or my own clothes. I have a vent in the bathroom that connects to the building system and sometimes you can smell other people's cooking through it. The thing that I keep coming back to is the bin. I have a kitchen bin with a foot pedal. The lid had started, occasionally, to be slightly ajar when I came home. Not open. Resting on something. The first couple of times I assumed I'd shoved something in too full. Then one evening I came home and the lid was ajar and the bin was almost empty. I had taken the bag out that morning. There was nothing in there to hold the lid up. I lifted the lid and looked inside and there was nothing. I closed it. It closed properly. I stood in my kitchen with my coat still on and I tried to think of a reason for that and I couldn't. I started taking photos of my flat before I left for work. Just on my phone. The kitchen, the living room, the bedroom. I told myself it was so I'd stop being paranoid, because I'd come home and compare and everything would be the same and I'd feel better. For about 10 days everything was the same. On the 11th day, the curtain in the bedroom, which I always leave halfway open because of the way the morning light hits, was fully open. I have the photo from the morning. It is halfway. The photo I took that evening, when I noticed, it is fully open. I sat on the bed for a while looking at both photos on my phone and not really feeling anything yet. I did the things you do. I checked the door frame, I checked the windows, I checked behind the wardrobe. I asked the building manager whether anyone had been in for maintenance. He checked the log. No one. I asked if anyone else had a key to my flat. He said only the master, which was kept in a locked box in the office, and the spare I had given the previous tenant's friend, which I had taken back when I moved in. I had taken it back. I remembered taking it back. I had put it in the drawer in the hall console. The drawer in the hall console had 2 keys in it when I checked. Mine, and the spare. Both were there. I picked the spare up and I looked at it and I had a feeling, the kind of feeling you get when you look at something familiar and it is very slightly not right, and I couldn't tell you what was different about it. The teeth looked the same. The color was the same. It felt the same in my hand. I want to be clear that I have no proof that key had been copied. I have no proof of anything. I changed the lock anyway. It cost me £110 and I did not sleep well for about 2 weeks after, because changing the lock meant I had decided, somewhere in myself, that it had been real. The corridor light still comes on sometimes before I get to it. I tell myself, now, that it could be the sensor catching the lift movement, that the angle is wrong, that I've been imagining a pattern. I tell myself that most nights. Some nights I take the stairs instead, and I stand at the fire door at the end of my corridor for a moment before I open it, and I listen, and there is never anything to hear. Report 4. My mother passed in the spring and I moved back into her house for a while to sort out her things. It was the house I grew up in. I knew it the way you know a house you grew up in, which is to say I knew it in a way I couldn't really see anymore, because it was background. I was there for about 3 months in total. I want to talk about the last 3 weeks. The house is at the end of a quiet road. Detached, small front garden, a long back garden that goes down to a fence and then a field. My mother had lived alone in it for the last 11 years, since my father died. She had carers in twice a day in the last year of her life. I had met most of them. Some of them came to the funeral. The first thing was that I kept finding lights on in rooms I hadn't been in. The small lamp in the front room, the light over the cooker, once the light in the airing cupboard. I assumed I was doing it without remembering. I was tired, I was sorting through 40 years of paperwork, I was crying at strange times of the day. The brain does what it does. I started making a point of checking lights before I went to bed and before I left the house. The lights still came on sometimes when I came back. The second thing was that my mother's bedroom, which I had been avoiding, started to smell of her perfume more strongly than I remembered. I had taken most of her clothes to the charity shop in the second week. The wardrobe was nearly empty, but the room had that smell, the specific one, more on some days than others. I told myself it was in the carpet. I told myself it was grief doing odd things to my senses. Both of those might still be true. I want to be fair. The third thing was that I was sitting in the kitchen one afternoon with a cup of tea and I heard, quite clearly, the sound of the front door being unlocked. The mechanism turning. Then nothing. I went into the hall. The door was closed and locked. There was no one on the path outside, no one at the gate. I opened the door and stepped out and looked up and down the road and there was no one. I closed the door and locked it and stood with my hand on the latch and I thought, that was the sound of a key, that was not a knock, that was a key turning and then stopping. I went and looked in the drawer in the hall where my mother had kept the spare keys. There were 4 hooks inside. There were 3 keys on them. I did not know how many there should have been. I had not counted. There was no reason I would have counted. I went to the neighbor, an old friend of my mother's, and I asked her, as gently as I could, whether she had a key. She did. She showed it to me. We had tea. I asked her, eventually, whether she knew of anyone else who had one. She thought for a moment and she said, well, the carers had one, didn't they, on a fob, but the agency takes those back when the client passes, that's the procedure. She was sure they would have taken it back. She was sure. I rang the agency the next morning. They were polite. They said yes, the key had been returned, they had a signature for it, dated 2 days after my mother died. I asked if there was any chance a copy had been made at any point. They said that would be a serious breach of policy and they had no reason to believe anything like that had happened. They asked if I had a specific complaint. I said no. I didn't, really. I had a sound in a hallway and some lights and a smell. I changed the locks that week. The locksmith was a chatty man who told me about his grandchildren while he worked, which I was grateful for. After he left I sat in the kitchen and I felt, for the first time since I'd moved back in, that the house was actually closed. That word kept coming to me. Closed. Like before that it had been a room with a missing wall I hadn't noticed. The thing I haven't been able to put down is something smaller. About a week after the locks were changed, I was going through the last of my mother's bedside drawers, and I found a notebook she had kept, just a little diary thing, mostly appointments and shopping lists. In the last few months of entries there were a couple of lines that I read several times. One said, the kitchen light was on again this morning, I must be doing it in my sleep. Another, 2 weeks later, said, ask Jay about the back door, she said she always checks it. Then nothing more about it. Then the usual lists. Then the entries stop, because that's when she went into the hospital the last time. I don't know who Jay was. There were 2 carers in the rotation with names beginning with J. I have thought about asking. I haven't. I have told myself a number of versions of what those notes might mean, and the kindest one is that my mother, at the end, was getting confused, and was leaving the lights on, and was forgetting the back door, and that is all there was to it. That version is probably true. It probably is. I sold the house at the end of that summer. The new owners are a young family. I met them once, at the handover. I gave them every key I had, and I told them which ones went where, and I did not tell them anything else, because there was nothing to tell that I could have made into a sentence without sounding like a person who needed to sit down. Sometimes I drive past. The lights are on in different rooms than I remember, which is what you would expect, because other people live there now. I know that. I still slow down when I pass it. I don't know what I'm looking for. I haven't worked that part out yet.